Welcome to Gotta Run with Will. I'm Stacy Creamer, and I'm speaking today with my triathlon coach, Ray Camano. Welcome, Ray.
Thank you, Stacy. It's great to be here.
Even on this very cold day.
Super cold. The coldest day, I think, so far this year, right?
And fittingly, for being a triathlon coach, I hear you got here by city bike?
That's right. I just looked at Google Maps. It said that riding my bike would be the fastest way here, and I was like, we're doing it. Yeah.
Rock star. So, did you always live in New York? And if not, where'd you start out? How'd you get here?
Yes, I'm a born and bred New Yorker. I was born in the Bronx, and I grew up on Long Island, and pretty much have spent all of my life here in New York or just outside of the city, except 2 years in Toronto.
Oh, nice. Great.
Yeah.
So, I know you mainly as a triathlete, but what was your entry into sports? I heard a rumor that it was not immediately triathlon.
My entry into sports was running, I was kind of a little bit faster maybe than some of the other kids when we would play.
So what age is this?
I'll probably say elementary school. And when I got to middle school, there was a track team, and there were tryouts for the track team, and I did a tryout, and it seemed fun. So after school, I started going to practice, and that kind of started me running. I enjoyed it.
And what kind of distances were you doing in middle school? I can't remember what.
Oh, the distances, it was like I would be running 100, 200, so basically sprinting, but it didn't seem like sprints back then.
Yeah, and then that continued into high school?
It did. One of the things that's, as I think about my time running or doing sports, there's always some moment that happened with that was kind of like a game changer for me, or it was pivotal. So in middle school, the assistant coach, a great guy, he kind of took an interest in me, and at one point told my parents that probably should send me to a private school, that continuing on in public school wasn't the greatest thing where we were on Long Island. And that kind of just set me on a different trajectory. So I went to the Stony Brook School, which is a prep school on Long Island, and I joined the cross country team. And that kind of started me running, real running anyway.
So did you run in Van Cortlandt Park then? Or I don't know what they do from Long Island.
We did a lot of running out in Sunken Meadow State Park on Long Island. That's where most of the big high school championship races were. But we did do a few races in Van Cortlandt. Van Cortlandt it's incredible, right? Yeah.
And you yet again met one special coach in high school?
Yes, his name was Marvin Goldberg, and he was kind of legendary. I just remember my first day kind of going, the track was down these stairs. It was a cinder track, and he was kind of standing there and giving orders, and people were running and warming up, and he just had such a presence, and you knew oh, this is serious, right? What am I getting myself into? He was the senior master of the school, so he'd been there a very long time. I think at that point 30 years. And he had many champion teams and championship runners. And at the time when I started, there were two runners who were both a brother and sister who were state champions.
Wow.
And it was a really tiny school. The school had 350 students, so from 7th through 12. So my class size was like 60 students, so it was really tiny, but
two state champions out of that.
Yeah, punched well above its weight. He was really the force behind all of that. One of the things that I most fondly remember right off the bat is I think the thing that he was sort of ahead of his time on was while we would do a lot of running, out doing some runs on the fields and so on and so forth, there was always a track component, right? So you always had a speed component, and they were hard. They were really hard workouts. And he had this, when you would finish the interval, he'd always say, or he would regularly say, walk like a champion. In order to run like a champion, you had to walk like a champion. That really just, at the time, it was just like, oh, okay, so we got to take this serious. We can't just, fall down to the ground because we just killed ourselves through that interval, right? It sticks with you. It's something that whenever, anyone brings up Marvin Goldberg, that's always brought up.
I love that statement. To me, it kind of means carry yourself that way in the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
It's not just that moment when you feel like keeling over and walk instead, but really in everything you do, I think.
100%. One thing that I didn't mention is that he he was a missionary at one point, and while he was on his mission, he developed, or he got elephantitis.
Oh my
and
gosh.
so he had like this enlarged leg, and yet he rode his bike to the start of track, and he rode his bike around campus, and he was out there coaching athletes to be better. And here was this person, it's like it did not hold him back. And you never, if there was any point where there was pain or ever anything experienced, we never, as as athletes, ever experienced that. Yeah. So he definitely lived he walked the walk. Certainly.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
And so then you ran in college?
Yes, I walked on in college. I applied to Hamilton College, and I got in, and I didn't really talk up my running or anything, and I just walked on my freshman year. And I made varsity that year, which was cool. As a freshman. The highlight, I remember, Hamilton College is outside of Utica in Clinton, New York. And so, like today, it was super cold up there starting probably late October. And there would be snow on the ground from November to May at Hamilton. And the championships, the state championships, were in Buffalo that year. And I just remember this, it was snowing. It was a snowy, muddy day, super cold. And I think that changed, the dynamic of who performed well and who didn't. And I was just so happy to be there my freshman year that I was just like, just go have fun. And I don't love the cold, but somehow I actually scored for my team.
Oh my God.
I finished 5th on the team that
It's
day.
kind of like the younger figure skaters who don't feel all the pressure yet, and they get the gold and everything. It's only then years later that they feel the pressure. Did you feel the pressure more as a senior, where it was more weight on your shoulders then, or did you manage to carry it lightly?
Yeah, you know what? I think in cross country, I always thought I was a track runner. It's kind of funny. So cross country was just fun to me, right? And whether it was high school or college, yes, you did feel a sense of like, oh, you're the captain of the team. But I just enjoyed it so much that it was just, it was great fun. Yeah. And yeah, you wanted to be, first, second, or whatever, third on the team in terms of placement.
So did you continue running seamlessly through adulthood, or what happened?
When I left college, I started a career in retail. And I started in Macy's executive training program, which was at the time, back a long time ago, it was considered like the Harvard of retail.
I was going to say, that's pretty prestigious, yeah.
And so I did that, and I kind of stopped running. I wasn't really doing much exercise, and that probably went on for like 4 or 5 years. But after 6 years at Macy's, I went to work for Kids R Us, which was a division of Toys R Us, and they had this gym very close by their corporate office, and I started training and started doing running inside on a treadmill, and that kind of led to doing some additional running, meeting someone who said, hey, why don't you join me and run a marathon? So I was like, okay.
Oh, wow. So you went right to
Yeah, within a year I ran a marathon,
wow.
starting back.
What's your favorite distance actually in running, if you have one? Where has it changed, or what was it then?
I think the marathon sticks with me just because it's the marathon, right? Like you experience so much in the course of a marathon, right? So, and I also think that it was one of these things where by my third marathon, I was training in a very different way, right? And it had such an impact on the way, it had such an impact on the rest of my life, so to speak. So, I think I would probably say it's the marathon. Now, I've run probably 10 or so, but 2 of those were at the end of an Ironman.
Right,
so,
right.
in terms of actual, in terms of open marathons, about 8.
But you're pretty quick at the marathon. Your best time is
2:49. 2:49, not bad, not bad. Yeah.
And that was at Boston?
It was at Boston,
Wow.
1997.
Yeah. Oh, I ran it in 96.
What a great experience Boston is, right? Like, I think back then, maybe there were 15 to 18,000 runners, but the thing that when I think about that day, it just felt like it was a local race. Like you start that morning in Hopkinton, and you just the corrals were small. They didn't seem all that big. I don't remember there being a long sort of wait between when you had to be there and the start of the race.
So you were marathoning and maybe running more. What got you into triathlon? Because that's a pretty big leap, even from running.
I always had an interest in triathlon. I had done a little bit of swimming in high school, and so and I was like, I can ride a bike. I had like a mountain bike at the time, and I think the first I remember going out to Montauk. And I wasn't out there for a race. I was out there with friends, and I decided to check out the race, the Olympic race in Montauk, which was an early June race, right? And this was, I'm going to say this was maybe 2000, 2001 or so. And when I was out there, I was just like, it was a cold, rainy day, and the people were coming out of the water in their swimsuits, and then getting on the bike and not putting any other gear on. And I was like, why would I do this? This is insane. Like, these people are crazy. It's so cold out. Like, what are they doing? That kind of, dampened my enthusiasm initially. But a few years later, I decided I was going to do one, not much training. And I did Westchester, the Westchester Tri.
Yep.
And actually, Scott Berlinger, who is the founder of Full Throttle, he was at that race. He wasn't racing, but he was there coaching. And he knew me from Chelsea Piers, the gym I trained at. And I just remember him just like telling me how, like, he was standing in near the transition area, and he was just yelling at me, telling you, doing everything wrong. And he's like,
he's
like, you're doing everything wrong. He goes, like, why are you putting that shirt on? You're putting on socks. You don't need socks. Come on, hurry up, get out of transition. And I was just chuckling because I was like, okay,
I put on socks for years.
I was like, I don't want my feet to get beat up. Meanwhile, I was riding like a mountain bike, so he was just shaking his head. And I don't even remember if we spoke at the end of the race, but I just remember going back to Chelsea Piers, and I was like, yeah, I'm going to sign up for this group because I obviously need some direction on how to do this.
Yeah.
And that kind of started me in triathlon.
Oh, that's great. That's amazing. So did you stick with Olympic? Did you move to Ironman? What's the trajectory there?
I stuck with Olympic. I didn't do, in those early days, I didn't do a lot of sprints. And I don't know that there were necessarily a lot of sprints back then. I think that's become more of a recent thing. But yeah, so I just kind of did whatever the team did. And so I went back to Montauk. That was one of my first races. And I just loved it. I mean, again, even before, I think I've always loved the process of training and how that, the feel-good sense you get from it. But the thing about Full Throttle that I love so much in those early days, well, there's two things. One is that it reminded me of my time in high school and college.
The camaraderie, the team.
Yeah, you're training with the team, that camaraderie, and the level of intensity that you bring to it because you want to do well, right? And just being around like-minded people, that community. So I think that was a huge thing. And then there was kind of back then, Scott was kind of throwing different things at the wall and seeing what stuck. And which is kind of funny now, but we would do all kinds of crazy things like rock climb and wrestle. We were doing weird things. I was like, what does this have to do with triathlon? It was kind of like, it was interesting because Scott was a little maybe ahead of his time. It eventually morphed into true triathlon training, but it was kind of a combination of like Spartan and CrossFit all wrapped into one.
It's not a bad idea. It sounds like your high school coach getting you to do sprint work, really, even though you're doing longer distances.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a good way of incorporating it, and it keeps it fun too if you're doing all those things. One of my favorite things has always been trial by fire, which is this crazy race we do at Full Throttle where you swim and run and swim and run and swim and run and swim and run, and it's a race and everyone competes, so it's really fun. I'd like 5:30 in the morning on a February day when you sort of have to run outside on the deck to get to the track.
Yeah, no,
That's always a good one.
it's transitioning from that like hard swim to a hard run,
Yeah.
and no, that's I think again, it's one of these things that that's kind of unique to Full Throttle and training with the team.
Yeah.
And it lives on, like it's something that obviously Scott champions and gets behind, and now he does both. There's an individual event and a relay.
Yeah, I did the relay time last year. It was really fun.
The relays are super fun.
Yeah.
It's great to see that. If the matches are are good matches, then it's a lot more competitive and fun to watch. So no,
absolutely.
It's a great
So I
experience.
think I got to know you when you first came back from Canada. That's my first. I met you a little bit before because you'd be in town or something, and then I think I really remembered you coming back from Canada. And one thing I really wanted to get into, about the same time, which was it 3 years ago, 4 years ago, we both experienced disruption and kind of contraction in our respective industries, me book publishing and you in fashion and retail. And you pretty much reinvented yourself. So I'd love you to talk about that, because I just think that would be really intriguing for people to hear about that. Because it was, I know, since I felt such kinship for you, because it's a really scary time when you feel like, oh, wow, like I'm not just out of a job for a little bit. I'm maybe like never getting a job in my industry again. Now what?
Yeah.
So what was that like?
100%. I think, technology basically has transformed these industries, right? And it's interesting, the company probably at the forefront of that is Amazon. And just like they, changed the publishing world, they actually did that across retail as well, and fashion included.
Yeah.
And with that transformation, my career and my my focus has always been on the retail side. So, I knew a lot about how to get the customer to shop in a store setting, not necessarily in an online environment. And that was my training, and that's what I was really successful at. And basically through companies just cost cutting based on the need, like people weren't shopping in stores, they're shopping online. Job went away. And then it was a question of, okay, so there are fewer and fewer opportunities, what next? I still was looking, but again, I thought, well, I really love what I do. I love this part of my life. I love the training, and what about coaching? And so, again, I mentioned Scott. Scott was like, why don't you get your certification, and then you can assist me, and do some things on the team. And so I got my certification, and I was still interviewing. Wasn't like, oh, I'm going to go do this. But that process of getting that certification, it just allowed me, when the opportunity came up, to kind of take that opportunity. And 6 months after getting my certification, one of the coaches decided he wanted to take some time away, and I was able to step in and take his role. And that really, again, that kind of set me on a path to where I am now. And the early days, like any career, you're not really sure. Like, okay, I have to do X, Y, and Z. And yes, I knew endurance training. I had a comfort level with it. I was passionate about it enough to do sort of the research and learn more. And it's just different, right? You're used to going in, and I was in my career for 25 years before that. So you just have such a body of knowledge and a way of doing things, again, process that you understand, and all of that had to be figured out again. But I think the thing that really kind of solidified and helped me along the way was realizing that a lot of the things you've learned in your prior career, you can use in your new one.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Coaching is a lot like developing talent. In my job at Armani Exchange, I had a team of 65 people. Now, they didn't directly report to me. I had maybe 4 direct reports, but they had reports. You want to groom and develop talent. And so it's coaching, basically. It's getting people to see where the opportunities are for their growth and rewarding them when they're successful, and that spurs on, and they that person motivates them. Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same way. That's what coaching is at the end of the day. It's helping people to improve the areas that they need to improve so that they can achieve their goals.
Yeah. And in triathlon, that's so important because with the three sports, everybody kind of has a strength maybe, and everybody has maybe a weakness. And you tend to want to work on your strengths,
right?
Even though we need to be working on our weakness.
Yeah, and you're kind of the one that has to say, hey, we need to emphasize this over this,
more,
and it, I realized that was the thing that probably I enjoyed the most in my career. Now it's what I do. Like that wasn't I didn't spend the bulk of my time on that in my career before, but it's what I do now full time. Yeah, and I think that's why I enjoy what I do so much.
Well, and you don't just enjoy it, you're extremely good at it. How many years ago did you become a coach at Full Throttle, roughly? I mean, kind of transitioned.
Roughly 3.5 years ago.
3.5 years ago, and this year you were named Coach of the Year at Chelsea Piers.
Yeah, I was named
And there were like a lot of coaches at Chelsea Piers. I mean, when you go there, the board has, 60 pictures and I don't know what.
Yeah, I mean, it's really an honor. I mean, there was definitely some things that this year came together and solidified. I think there are other people that could have gotten it, but...
And he's modest, too.
But I started the long course group this year, and that was extremely successful. So, whereas in the past I would have, at the height, I'd have maybe 15 people in my group. At the height this year, I had 30 people in my group, and generally around 20 throughout the year, which was the capacity of the group for the most part. Yeah. So that was really exciting.
And mind you, so people know, this is people electing to show up training at 6 in the morning. This is not.
That's right. We train at 5:45.
5:45.
And again, it was just refocusing the training. So
but to attract people at that time, I mean, it's a good time to train. If you're going to train for 2 hours, you need to start early if you're going to your day job. But that's really quite something to expand the program like that and fill it.
No, definitely.
And you're full now for the start in January, right?
Yeah, I'm really excited to say this is year 2, and with just following up with people and having new people approach me, we're at capacity already for the start of January. So that's really exciting.
I never got a chance to tell you, just the other day, it was last week, I was going to swim and I went up the stairs and they have the board where it's like an electronic board and the pictures of all the coaches, and I didn't realize you could touch it and then it gets big. Like if you touch one portrait, it gets big.
Oh, yeah.
And these 2 little boys and their father had touched yours and they were looking at that. So I couldn't resist. I went by and I said, that's my coach. And, he's the best coach at Chelsea Piers this year. He just got the prize. And the father looked surprised and he said, he's coaching my son. So you're coaching children, too. I mean, really little kids.
It's interesting. You do things sometimes just because, I had to get my production up. When I started out at Chelsea Piers, while I coached triathlon, I also personal trained. And personal training can be swim lessons, it can be strength training, so on and so forth. So it's a bunch of different things. But I really love the coaching part, and that's where I was strongest. And as one coach left, he's like, I'm doing a bunch of kids swim lessons. Do you want to take them over? And I was like, well, I'm terrified of that thought, but I kind of need more production, so yeah, I'll do it.
How's it been? It must be totally different than the triathlon groups, but
oh, it totally is.
But it might be a feeder program. Who knows?
It could be a feeder program, right? It's incredible because there is nothing that can make that requires greater presence than teaching a 3 to 5-year-old how to swim. You don't get to be 90% there. You have to be 100% there.
And mindfulness, that's gonna get you to be here now more than anything. That's great.
I mean, there's nothing better when they go from using a flotation device to being able to, go 10 yards on their own, right? Yeah. Like that's just, I mean, there's no price. There's no reward greater than that.
Yeah. That's my heart.
Yes.
Well, I have to say what I think would be, if I were in your shoes, another great reward, seeing Tracy Paulsen finish the Ironman in Lake Placid.
Yes. Tracy Paulsen, you did it! You are an Ironman! You are an Ironman!
Tell me about that and coaching her toward that.
Yeah, Tracy Paulsen, She was one of the LP4 that year, and that was 2 years ago, and it was the first group of athletes that I coached to Lake Placid. She had approached me like a year and a half before and said, she was thinking about just starting triathlon a year and a half before, and she's like, I don't know how to swim. Do you think that I can do this? I signed up for this race in the fall. And I said, well, if you're committed to this, I'll get you there. And so from that point on, she was the one that kind of like stoked me into doing, let's do Ironman together. So after 6 months and she did a race, she was like, you and I need to do Ironman together.
Oh my goodness.
So the two of us, along with a few others, did Ironman that year.
But you took someone who hadn't swum like a year before.
She wasn't the only one. Two of the others were new to swimming or new-ish to swimming.
Oh my goodness.
It was a really great journey with all of them.
Yeah.
But Tracy's was particularly good because that day, her bike, she had a brand new, beautiful bike, and something went wrong mechanically on it, and she couldn't change gears. And so she had stopped 20 miles into a 112-mile bike ride. She stopped because there's mechanics along the way. And so the mechanic was looking over her bike. And as she stopped, this person comes plowing, loses control of her bike. It was raining. She had lost control of her bike and ran over Tracy basically.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even know this part of the story.
And so Tracy, at that point, her bike, the tech was like, I don't think there's anything we can do. And she's like, okay, I'm just going to get on it and ride. So she rode the balance of the ride without being able to, on a fixie, basically. She couldn't change gears.
What gear was it? It was in the big gear, little gear?
I don't know exactly.
Yeah.
I still marvel because if you know Lake Placid, this is a course that has 8,000 feet of elevation over the course of the bike.
Right.
And she finished that bike, and she made it under the cutoff doing that. And then she ran 26.2 miles and finished that race. And that's why you see that elation.
So now I really get it. I thought
the elation
for me,
going across
just to finish, I think I'd feel that way. But under those circumstances,
pretty
that's
incredible.
The thing I really love about triathlon. I love it, and of course hate it too. There's always the chance of some or several wild card crazy things happen. In running, I always say it's sort of, the horn sounds, start line, finish line. I mean, you can say, oh, I got a stitch, whatever, but there's no act of God, weird thing that that you have to contend with. But triathlon, some of the best races, it can happen all the time, but that's a particular example of it. But I think that's what makes them so special too. You don't court them, you don't invite those moments, but when they happen, I feel you learn the most about yourself.
It's like, okay, things aren't going so great, but I'm gonna make the most of this experience. And I mean, it really tests your mettle, right?
Yeah, really, not to be hokey or anything, but Tracy perfectly could have dropped out at that point. No one would have said, wow, she dropped out. I mean, no, everyone was like, of course, she dropped out. She got hit by a bike. Her bike was in one gear, who wouldn't drop out?
Right.
But the fact that she continued, and I have to think that has to do a bit with her coaching and just all the leading up, because everyone focuses on race day, but meanwhile, there have been months leading up to that race day. And that's going to really inform how you perform and your medal and everything else. But I just think, for her whole life, she'll have that she knows that when the chips were really down, she came through.
Yeah. That short little video encapsulates it so perfectly, right? And, people ask me, when they ask me, oh, do you miss fashion? And I say, it's just moments like that just, I don't. And the beauty of it is that, I get to have those moments with people. Maybe not quite at that level, but you have moments like that every day.
You have every person you coach practically, and you coached me this summer for Worlds, and I'm so grateful, and that was such a great experience. So they may not all be that extreme then in the final conclusion is hers, but everybody has their story,
absolutely,
their process, their journey. That must be so great. So what's on tap for you for races this year?
I'm going to do a marathon early on. I'm going to do
like a marathon, right off
a real full-on open marathon. Yes, I want to qualify for Boston in 2021.
Because we're all going.
That's right. Everybody's going to Boston in 2021.
Yeah.
So I want to qualify. I want to be there.
And what do you have to run?
I have to run.
Sorta. I know it's fungible. But
I basically have to run around 3:30.
Okay.
I think for my age, it will be 3:35.
Right.
But you obviously have to.
And you want to
have
come
do
as
better.
far under as you can because the way the new rules
3:30.
work. Yeah.
Which I think is doable.
Yeah.
I'm pretty confident
I would
that it's
say so.
doable. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
My other big race. Well. I'm kind of treating that as just that's the race that gets me to the big race. But the big race of the season for me is Alpe d'Huez, which is
Tell me
in
about
France.
that. I shudder even just hearing the word. I did the climb in a very memorable time with Full Throttle, but
yeah, it's this. If you follow the Tour de France, it's it's one of the stages of the Tour de France, and
the
it's this
moonscape
incredible.
one for viewers at home that. Yeah,
it's this incredible climb, and it's just a really challenging. It's not an actual Ironman event, but the distances are very similar to a half Ironman.
Taking a whole group, right?
Well,
you persuaded a whole group of crazy people to go try this.
There are going to be quite a few people there from the team, which is really exciting. I see this as like my individual race, but I will be coaching a few of the athletes there.
And so you're going to be racing yourself as well.
Oh yeah.
Is that a stress when you've done it before clearly with the Lake Placid, but is it hard to be both a coach and a competitor?
It's kind of good that I have many races under my belt because everything has to kind of be a little bit second nature for you. You kind of have to just do it. A little autopilot to make sure that everything. You can't spend too much time dwelling on all the things you have to get ready. You just have to be ready, set, go.
Yeah.
So that you have time and you're ready to help anybody who needs to be.
That's
who needs
a big
your
call.
assistance.
That's a big.
So
that's big.
That's really the trick to it. Again, just being there for them. And reality is, coach first, and then athlete.
That's pretty big.
I kind of see that as like my
Well, I have
role.
to say, I'm sure you lured many people into shopping, and maybe I've had things in my closet thanks to your creativity. But it feels like you really found yourself in coaching.
Yeah, no, I think so. It's interesting that, when I think of fashion, one of the things that I came away from that experience is like you have to develop a good eye because you're expected to be able to see. And, I worked with designers, and you have to be able to decide which product is the right product and how much of that product and so on and so forth. So, and be able to walk into stores and kind of dissect them. So you develop what we call a good eye, so to speak. And so when you think, I talked about the coaching aspect and how that translates development and all of that. But the interesting thing is that eye has actually been really useful for my time as a coach. And primarily is, in swimming, oftentimes you're evaluating people based on their stroke, and I find that I don't come from a swimming background, but that ability to sort of analyze and dissect and see,
really see,
it allows me to say, okay, well, they're doing X, let's see, and just again, in spending time with people, knowing this is the correction that works for that. And this is the drill that I need them to do. And being able to know the right cue, like this is the cue when someone is doing that. So I just think it's interesting. It's like, okay, there's some other skills other than the coaching and development. But anyway, that's been a really interesting. That's a really interesting part. I really enjoy that aspect as well.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Manhattan Neighborhood Network, Will Sanchez. And again, special thanks to you, Ray, for coming here and being interviewed. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot for tuning in.
Thanks, Stacy.
Great. Oh, that was super fun. I just had the most amazing conversation with Full Throttle triathlon coach Ray Camano. You can catch it on Gotta Run with Will on YouTube. And I'd also like to wish everyone a great new decade. 2020 is coming, especially to my friends on Central Park Track Club and Full Throttle. And get ready for the New York City Marathon 50th year. Gotta run.
I just had a terrific conversation with Stacy Creamer on the Gotta Run with Will show. You can catch us on YouTube. You can join me at Full Throttle at Chelsea Piers Fitness. 2020's starting up on January 2nd, and come join us for a long course training. Gotta run.